Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. It is here. It is officially Festivus season. I have broken out the rope lights. We have victors in the wild card rounds, albeit some surprise victors. And Luke Jones joins us now from Owings Mills and all things the Castle all week. Luke, everything moves up a day on a Saturday night game. It's prime time. It's Lamar Jackson. And surprisingly, it's Derrick Henry and Ryan Tannehill and Mike Vrabel, and here we go. It's the Tennessee Titans, and we'll be seeing Eddie George and Ray Lewis highlights all week, no doubt about that, right? And the Patriots, ding dong, the witch is dead, huh?
Yeah, I think what's funny about it, Nestor, is I don't know how surprising it really is at this point. I mean, you saw the same Patriots team that I saw down the stretch. Tennessee, not that they were necessarily on in national TV a whole lot or anything like that, but certainly a team that was playing better down the stretch with Ryan Tannehill at the helm. Go figure. But I think as much as we talked about the three possibilities for opponents for the Ravens in the divisional round, the Bills, the Texans, and the Titans, there was lots of debate about who you would want to play, who you wouldn't want to play. And let's face it, the Ravens would have been very clearly heavily favored against any of those three opponents at this point. But when you're talking about the Tennessee Titans, Derrick Henry, who led the NFL in rushing this year, had a fantastic year. The Titans, who aren't the same exact kind of running game as the Ravens by any means, but they like to run the football. And you have a quarterback that didn't necessarily play great in Foxborough, but made a couple plays here and there. And say what you want about Ryan Tannehill. I hear you, anyone listening, hearing me singing the praises of him, but go look at the numbers. He was really, really good the second half of the season. So I don't think it's a game the Ravens need to be scared by any means, but certainly a team that's confident and playing pretty darn well. And even if it is a diminished version of the New England Patriots, they still went into Foxborough and won a playoff game. And the Ravens, as much as anyone, should respect that reality because they've done it a couple times over the last decade or so.
Well, how about three division winners going nighty-night over the weekend, right? Like, at home, and that is the cautionary tale. The cautionary tale is there's a lot of hurt feelings in Philadelphia after the quarterback got hit on the head. There's a lot of hurt feelings in New Orleans, and maybe there should be, in regard to what is or what isn't pass interference. But, these early good nights, it's not like the Ravens are strangers to that, right? I mean, Lamar Jackson has a photographic memory about every bad thing that happened to him with a lightning bolt last January, and clearly has filed that away. And you would hope that would come to the forefront at 8:15 on Saturday night, that this isn't last year all over again. I have no reason to believe it is. I have the purple lights at. I don't know if you know that, Luke. I'm a believer. I'm going to be in South Florida this week planning Super Bowl parties, and I'm hoping that Ryan Tannehill and tackling Derrick Henry are not the end of that, right?
You wouldn't think so. But certainly it's a matchup that's interesting in understanding that the Ravens have had some issues. Not that it's been an epidemic, but some issues with some of those outside run schemes where a running back loves to cut back, run to the edge and cut back. We've seen them have some issues with that from time to time. You think about Chubb early in the year against Cleveland, although they did a fantastic job against him in Week 16. You think of Raheem Mostert and the 49ers doing what they did in that early December game. But I think you still look at the Tennessee Titans, and for all the credit they deserve for what they did against New England, you still really wonder about that team. And you say, okay, I'll give Derrick Henry running the football effectively against this Ravens defense, at least a little bit. But are they going to have enough firepower to score deep into the 20s against the Ravens defense? And on the flip side, do they have nearly enough power on defense to slow this Ravens offense? So I don't think it's a game where Ravens fans should be losing any sleep. You could certainly argue maybe of the three potential matchups they had for the divisional round, maybe this is the less desirable one just because of Tennessee playing pretty darn well down the stretch. But I think this is still much more about the Ravens, much more about them going out and getting off to a good start, not having any rust, not losing their edge after not playing a game that matters in a couple weeks. So it still comes back to the Ravens playing their own game, and that's where, as you mentioned, very much a cautionary tale looking at what happened Wild Card Weekend. That's why it's so important to get a bye, because so much of it comes down to probability. Can you keep playing well? I mean, the Saints, I think a lot of people were picking the Saints to get to the Super Bowl out of the NFC. I think I saw ESPN pick them against the Ravens for their Super Bowl prediction going into the playoffs.
It's made a lot harder when you have to go win the first week. I mean, the Ravens didn't have a chance to lose this week, so therefore, I mean, that's how the Patriots did it all those times, right? I mean,
exactly. I mean, that it's not just a week of rest; it's a week out of harm's way, right? I mean,
which is 2 out of 3 ain't bad, but it ain't good enough in the playoffs if you got to play 3 weeks.
No question. That's why we've talked about how important having a first-round bye has been. I mean, the 2012 Ravens were the last team to play Wild Card Weekend to get to a Super Bowl. I mean, that's how long it's been. That shows the value of at least being one of the top 2 seeds, let alone the value of having home field advantage. So the Saints, they had a bad day. Give the Vikings a lot of credit. Their defense played very well to hold New Orleans to 20 points. A couple uncharacteristic mistakes, and you're going home. And it's very, very fast, very sudden. And that's where the Ravens, like I said, not that Tennessee's a team that anyone should be terrified of, but you need to start fast, and that gets Tennessee out of what they want to do, which is run the ball and control the clock. They did a good job against New England in that way. But if you start fast, which the Ravens have shown the ability to do, and jump out early and have an early 10-0 lead, that really takes the Titans out of what they want to do best. So it's again, I've talked about this with so many opponents that they've faced going all the way back to the end of October until now, where it's about the Ravens. And if they do the things that we're used to seeing them do, I don't think they're going to have a lot of problems on Saturday night. But if you sleepwalk through the first quarter and you turn the ball over and Derrick Henry cracks a long run off the edge, cutting back, and suddenly you look up and it's 10-0 in favor of Tennessee, then, oh boy, it's not that it's over.
That's not where I want to be at 9 p.m., right?
Yeah,
literally.
It's just you have a Titans team then that just knocked off the defending Super Bowl champions, ending the dynasty in the eyes of many people, and then all of a sudden they have a lead over the best team in the NFL at the end of the first quarter. That's the recipe that the Ravens need to avoid, and that's why it's going to be so important for them to not just have a good week of practice, but come out ready to play on Saturday night and have that same urgency that they showed even against Pittsburgh, even resting their starters in Week 17, the urgency that they showed there and playing with the edge that they had there. If they do those things, I don't think they're going to have too many difficulties against the Titans. I'm not predicting a 40-point win because it's the playoffs, and I think you need to have more respect for the fact that playoff football is different than the regular season. But at the same time, this is a team clearly better than the Tennessee Titans, and go out and take care of business and don't let them hang around and play the style of football they like to play.
Well, it can't be the reason your season ended was because you lost to a 9-7 team when you were the greatest team in Ravens history. I mean, that's what this team is set up to do now. They're either set up to go to Miami and win a Super Bowl and fulfill their destiny, or they are going to be one of those things we don't talk about around here, like the 2006 Ravens, which we've talked a lot about, by the way. And you hit me last week about, hey, I'd like to hear some 2006 Ravens on the show and what they think and where their perspective would be 14 years later. And, dude, I've unloaded my phone, and it's astonishing how many of those guys are still in my life on Facebook, on LinkedIn, in my phone, a reach away. So we are going to hear from some of those people that were involved in that, and that is the cautionary tale. I mean, John Harbaugh wasn't around here for that, but Marshall Yonder was, right? I mean, Sam Cooke was. I mean, we have Sam Cooke coming out with us at Greenmount Station on Tuesday night. Come on out, everybody in Carroll County. You know how great the crab cakes are. Special Festivus edition on Tuesday night with Sam Cooke. And, of course, I'm heading to Miami this weekend. If you want to be a part of our ground package, our parties, we have rooms, we have tickets, we have all of that coming down the pipe. But all of that still is about Lamar executing and staying healthy and doing what he does in the defense, tackling Derrick Henry. We're sitting here talking about Ryan Tannehill, you talk about Mike Vrabel and Dean Pease, and Kamalea Correa, which we're going to talk about all that all week. But tackling Derrick Henry was something a lot of folks in the SEC didn't like doing after halftime. I remember that. And we saw some shades of that this year, late in games, at the end of the year, where they were running the football against Houston, now against New England. I mean, they've played two legitimate playoff teams the last couple of weeks. They're already in the middle of the playoffs. I hope we don't need smelling salts, to your point, right?
Yeah, and that's one of those things. I want to be clear about this. For me, it has very little to do with sitting Lamar Jackson and the guys that they chose to rest in Week 17, because you can play Week 17 and have a bye and still come out rusty. I mean, there's...
And the guys that played hard. We'll all say that.
Sure. So I don't think it has anything to do with whether you play or not in Week 17. What it does have to do with is how you handle the 2 weeks after that. So we're a week into that conversation as far as the Ravens now knowing they're playing Tennessee. Coaches got back to the facility on Sunday to continue preparations. They did most of their preliminary work on the Titans last week because they had already played Houston and Buffalo. So it's not as though the coaches had to go back and rewrite everything they did game planning for those two teams. So I think from that standpoint, you don't mind it as much. And now it's a case of the players will ramp up from a practice standpoint. They practiced last week, but Lamar Jackson had a stomach bug and missed practices. Hayden Hurst missed some practices. Some other players were under the weather. It sounds like Mark Ingram's going to be a full go at practice, at least at some point this week, and the expectation remains that he's going to play in the divisional round. So, but practicing and mentally preparing and taking care of your body and just not turning off that switch, right? I mean, some of these guys like Jackson, like a Brandon Williams, like an Earl Thomas, they haven't played a meaningful football game in a couple weeks. And by the time they kick off on Saturday night, it's going to be close to 3 weeks in that regard. So not that you don't trust those guys, but there is that thought of wanting to come out and having that edge and starting fast and not allowing Tennessee to hang around and play their style of football. I mean, much as you want to talk about Ryan Tannehill playing well, and look, led the league in passer rating and was really, really good using play action. He's been good against pressure. But this isn't a guy in his second year exploding like Lamar Jackson did this year or Patrick Mahomes did last year. I mean, this is Ryan Tannehill, who was kind of an underwhelming, okay starter for the Miami Dolphins.
But a well-thought-of guy coming out of a guy where you saw the skill set and said, we need to develop. I mean, Lamar, it's amazing what Lamar's done in a year that Joey Harrington could never figure out and that Tim Couch could never figure. I mean, these really well-thought-of guys. Tannehill was one of those guys sort of universally thought to be intelligent and big-armed and all of those check boxes that you would want to see. I don't know that we should all be shocked that some of these guys don't blossom until they're 28, that not all of them are going to come out the way Lamar has and change their game in a year to go from to Tom Brady, right? I don't, and I would agree with you, some guys will never get it, and I saw Kyle Bowler in the pool a couple months ago, right? Yeah. And guys that it doesn't work for, and other guys that hang out like Josh McCown and make themselves credible backups. I'm going to have Chris Redman on this week. He made himself a credible backup for a long period of time. Tannehill could have gone that route, looked like he was going that route, but then at some point, you get tapped on the shoulder and you get handed the ball, right? RG3 got handed the ball 2 weeks ago. I mean, backup quarterbacks in this league play, right? And when they play, Lamar Jackson played and Joe Flacco never did again, right?
Sure. I mean, it certainly happens. I mean, you have to go back, but, I mean, Rich Gannon was a league MVP after kind of being a journeyman backup.
Chris Chandler was another guy that was forever just a guy, and then the light goes on at some point. That shouldn't be unusual in human nature, but sometimes their bodies are so beaten up, as is their reputation, right, that I mean, I don't know that Teddy Bridgewater won't come back and play at a high level at some point because it looked like he was playing at high. I mean, same thing with RG3. I mean, all these guys that might get a second act at 28 or 29 or 30, maybe you and I could both speak to how our lives were different at 28 or 29 than they were at 21 or 22, right?
Yeah, and that's a fair point. And not that you expect it, but I suppose there's the argument that it can happen. And I think we've seen with a number of quarterbacks, and I think Lamar Jackson's a great example, not as someone who failed or had this long stretch of time where he wasn't successful, but the importance of having the right coaching staff around a quarterback, having the right system, having enough talent. I mean, we talked a lot about post-Super Bowl 47, the weapons that Joe Flacco had or lack thereof. You know, we can talk about all these different factors with any quarterback. I mean, it's not as though Tom Brady just becomes Tom Brady overnight. There was a lot involved with that. There were a lot of players who helped him along the way, and kind of think of what Tom Brady was early in his career to what he became in circa 2007 when Randy Moss showed up, and then a few years later when Rob Gronkowski showed up. You know, it's not just whether a quarterback can play or not. You know, there are other variables involved there, and look, I don't know if this Ryan Tannehill thing is an 8-week thing and he's going to turn back into a pumpkin by Saturday night. I mean, let's face it, he didn't exactly play great football against the Patriots on Saturday. I mean, he made a couple throws, but also dropped a snap at one point and threw an interception. So
didn't quite look the way Josh Allen did, but we're not going to have to get into that this week.
Yeah,
Josh Allen looked like he did not want to play the Ravens this week.
yeah. I mean, you see a lot of that.
Dude, what the hell was that? I mean, that wasn't even like the NFL. That was crazy.
Well, I mean, the YOLO lateral that he had late in the game there, where they're driving and they're in scoring position, and he tries to lateral the ball just kind of randomly. I mean, but anyway, with Tannehill, is it a 7 or 8 week thing where it's a nice story, but then reality hits for him? And it very well could, going up against the top 5 defense on the road, a much more potent football team than the New England Patriots at this point. But does it continue for him? Is it a case where this is a little bit of a renaissance for him? I think a lot of the numbers you look at, which have been impressive for him, are things that you do wonder about sustainability in a different way than Lamar Jackson or any young quarterback, because you've seen Ryan Tannehill not be that guy for multiple seasons. So it's going to be interesting in that way. But again, I keep coming back to the Ravens starting fast, playing their brand of football, jumping out to a lead, neutralizing Derrick Henry a little bit more, and then you do have to put the game in Ryan Tannehill's hands if you're the Titans. I don't like their chances then. They're a team that needs to stay on schedule in a way with much more desperation than the Ravens do even. I mean, you can talk about the running game and say, yeah, the Ravens like to run the ball, and certainly they do. They do it better than anyone else, but they also have a quarterback who led the league in touchdown passes. They have a quarterback who's going to be the MVP of the league. Ryan Tannehill, it's been a nice story, but there's a lot of history there that says if they have to put the ball in his hands and they're down 13 points in the second quarter on Saturday night, then chances are the Ravens it's going to be more of a party type atmosphere in the second half than anything else. So it'll be very interesting in that regard, but it is always fascinating when you do see these situations where someone's either a failed starter or they've been a career backup, or we saw this with Nick Foles a couple years ago. I mean, look what he did and the contract he ended up getting in Jacksonville as a result. But I think when there is that kind of journeyman type quarterback who's had failures, not that they can't be successful elsewhere, but I think there's a much longer period of skepticism that it's real. And I think that's where many people are still looking at the Titans and looking at Ryan Tannehill, and look, he threw for 72 yards on Saturday night. It's not like he was the reason they beat the Patriots. It was about Henry, and it was about
you would say that about
playing
Trent Dilfer in 2001 too, until you lose to him, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's no question.
And Derrick
about
Henry would play the Jamal Lewis role, of like running people over and whatnot. I mean, that's how the Ravens lose. The Ravens kick the ball around, don't tackle Derrick Henry, and find themselves in a game in the fourth quarter somehow, some way, right? Like, that's the recipe for these purple lights to go dim next Sunday morning, right? Like, other than that, that's the homework. The homework is go beat a 9-7 team that's coming in here. Forget the fact that they just beat a woeful Patriots team, because that wasn't any great task on Saturday night.
Well, I mean, I think it's still an impressive task, but I think it's almost the opposite for me from the standpoint of you do need to start fast clearly, I mean, you saw what Derrick Henry can do, but go look at what their offense did the second half of the season in the regular season. And the regular season is different than the postseason. I understand that.
They finished drives, yeah.
I mean, A.J. Brown, their rookie wide receiver, has made a lot of plays. I mean, they were an explosive offense. They put up some points. Go look at their second half schedule. Just look at the game totals, the final scores. They scored some points, not at a Ravens level, but they weren't too far off in some of the scoring average and things of that.
Yeah, making them punt is going to be a victory. Every time we do it, you need to do it 9, 10, 11 times. You need to take the ball away, and you need to keep the third downs from becoming first downs.
Right. I mean, again, I'm going to be a broken record about this all week because it's the truth. If you start fast and you get them out of what they want to do, I don't think the Ravens are going to have problems.
I get to rest
really
easier at 10 o'clock on Saturday night. I don't come down to the press box in the second half all whittled away in a 3-point game somehow.
Sure. Yeah, you don't want to have them in a position where it's a 3-point game, and then Ryan Tannehill only has to make 1 or 2 plays. I mean, he's capable of doing that. I don't think anyone's going to be looking at this game and saying, yeah, Ryan Tannehill's going to throw for over 300 yards against the Ravens defense. I mean, the way that secondary's played down the stretch, you wouldn't anticipate that. But if Derrick Henry runs for $130 and they're able to control the clock and keep the Ravens and Lamar Jackson off the field a little bit more than most teams can, well, Tannehill could throw for 200 and maybe make a couple big throws on third down or throw a touchdown pass inside the red zone, and suddenly you're looking at a much different ball game. So I'll continue to say this. I've said this so many times down the stretch. Anytime the Ravens are playing a team that looks like they could be a potential threat, every single one, I said, what? This is much more about the Ravens. And we can talk. It'll be a different conversation potentially, assuming they move on and Kansas City moves on. And we're talking about the Chiefs a week from now because they're a team that I think has the firepower that you can be concerned about. But with Tennessee, it's still very much a case of how much of it's about the Ravens. What are the Ravens doing in this game? What mistakes did they make? How slow did they start potentially? It really comes down to, for this one, I don't see the Ravens losing it unless they don't play their game. And we haven't seen them do that. I mean, we've seen them have a couple slow starts here or there, or Cleveland, and you think about the first quarter of the Houston game, but then look what happened the rest of the way. You look at the Buffalo game. Okay, they weren't great, but then they make a big play to Hayden Hurst, and they're in control then. So it doesn't take much, but they just need to come out and look fresh, look like they have their edge, start fast, do the things that we're used to seeing them do, and if that's the case, then I think a 10-point spread that you're already seeing is, if you're into that kind of sort of thing as a gambler, that makes a lot of sense then. But if you come out and you punt the ball a couple times and Henry pops a couple runs and Tannehill makes a couple third down throws and suddenly you're trailing in that game, well, you're just going to give the Titans that much more confidence and you're going to be in for a dogfight because that's the kind of team that really thrives playing on schedule. They need to. They're going to have to play on schedule against the Ravens. I mean, if they think they're going to get into a shootout with the Ravens, I think that's going to end.
You'll shoot your eye out.
Yeah, but if it's a game where the Ravens start slow, make a couple mistakes, and they could potentially. There's a scenario where they could win 23-20, I suppose. But again,
my heart couldn't take 23-20. I think I pointed that out over the weekend.
Well, for the AFC Championship, at least, right? I mean, you kind of expect a close game with Kansas City if both teams advance, but just the Ravens just need to go out there.
Yeah, I'm expecting to only use the edge of my seat in the championship game. I hope that's not the case this week. Here's Luke at WNST.net. He'll be out in Owings Mills. I am bathing in purple light and the purple glow. We have a new camera in the studio, if you've been checking it out. So many new sponsors, including Liberty Pure Solutions. Doug's going to join us here this week talking about the safety of your water. And I think all my Baltimore Positive stuff, I've been talking about clean water and fresh water. They will have fresh water and clean water at State Fair next Thursday. Attorney General Brian Frosch will be our guest on the 16th of January, right after Martin Luther King Day. On the 17th, we're back downtown at Fadley's in Lexington Market with Martin O'Malley. We chatted last week with TJ Smith about all things mayoral. You'll be hearing that out at Baltimore Positive as well. And I was at Jennings the other night getting my drink on with some delicious stout. I had a stout with some dear friends. Our Miami trip is up and running, and all the information available. Just throw me an email, nasty@WNST.net. I know some other people are offering other trips that are pricier. They're going to cost you more money. We're going to save you money. We're going to show you a great time the way we did in New Orleans, but the Ravens have to do their deal as well. I'll be in South Florida scouting locations later this week, and don't forget on Tuesday night, Sam Cooke will join us at Greenmount Station at 7 p.m. We'll swap for the Bone Marrow Registry, and there goes my hero, and we will talk veteran stuff with a veteran guy who always has a pretty good sense of humor, is a great guy to talk to. Sam Cooke will join us at Greenmount Station. He is Luke. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter, and Luke at WNST.net. Nasty at WNST.net gets all the Miami information. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, anywhere you are. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop getting you ready for playoff football and Purple Festivus.